Hi, and welcome back. Today we're stepping into a world that feels familiar, but is missing one invention that changed everything. What if the Wright brothers had never invented the airplane? What if the modern world, the one built on speed, global travel, and instant connection, had never left the ground? What if crossing in still meant weeks at sea, and the sky remained forever out of human reach? At the dawn of the 20th century, humanity stood at a fragile crossroads. The world was shrinking, railways stitched continents together, steamships crossed oceans with growing confidence, and electricity was beginning to reshape daily life. Yet one frontier remained stubbornly closed: the sky. For centuries, flight had belonged only to birds, myths, and dreams. Inventors across Europe and America experimented with gliders and balloons, but controlled, powered flight remained elusive, a promise always just out of reach. Then, in December 1903, on the windswept sands of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, two bicycle mechanics from Ohio prepared to challenge gravity itself. Wilbur and Orville Wright, methodical and obsessive, had spent years studying airflow, building wind tunnels, and testing fragile wooden gliders. Their machine was crude by modern standards: fabric wings stretched over a wooden frame, a small engine barely powerful enough to lift its own weight, and a pilot lying prone to reduce drag. Crowds did not gather. Newspapers barely noticed. Few believed anything meaningful would happen. But in our timeline, it did. On December 17, 1903, the Wright Flyer lifted off the ground and stayed there, briefly, shakily, but undeniably. That moment ignited a chain reaction that reshaped the world. Within decades, airplanes would redraw maps and timelines alike. Wars would be fought from the air. Trade would accelerate. Cultures would collide and blend. The planet would feel smaller, closer, interconnected in ways no generation before had imagined. Distance itself would lose much of its meaning. Yet this breakthrough was never guaranteed. The Wrights operated on a razor's edge of failure. Their engines overheated. Their gliders crashed. Funding was scarce. Skepticism was relentless. A single broken wing, a miscalculated lift ratio, an abandoned experiment, and history could have turned away from the sky. Other inventors had already failed. Governments remained unconvinced. The world was ready to move on. So imagine this: one gust of wind too strong. One critical test ending in disaster. One decision to walk away. What if, on that cold December morning in 1903, the Wright Flyer never truly flew, and humanity remained grounded? Because if that moment slipped through our fingers, everything that followed would unravel in ways no one could have predicted. And the world we know would never exist. What if the most important invention of the 20th century failed not with an explosion or a scandal, but with silence? What if the airplane wasn't banned, destroyed, or stolen, but simply never proved itself worthy of belief? In this timeline, December 1903 ends differently. On the beaches of Kitty Hawk, the Wright brothers' fragile machine never achieved sustained, controlled flight. One test ends in a hard crash. The engine falters. The flyer lifts for only a moment, too brief, too unstable to convince witnesses or sponsors. There is no undeniable breakthrough, no clear victory over gravity. Just another failed experiment added to a long list of aviation disappointments. Disheartened and nearly bankrupt, Wilbur and Orville Wright returned to Ohio. Years of work have drained their savings, and public interest is fading fast. Newspapers dismiss the attempt as another eccentric dream. Government officials, already skeptical, see no reason to invest further. By 1905, the brothers quietly abandoned powered flight, turning their attention back to their bicycle business. History barely notices. The consequences are immediate. Across Europe, military planners who had cautiously monitored early flight experiments strike aviation from their budgets. The British War Office, the French Army, and the German General Staff redirect funding toward rail logistics, artillery, and naval expansion. Without proof that controlled flight is possible, the airplane is shelved as a curiosity, useful for exhibitions at best, irrelevant for war. Transportation remains bound to land and sea. Railways become the uncontested arteries of power, dictating where armies can move and where economies can grow. Steamships dominate global trade, reinforcing the importance of ports and naval choke points. Communication across continents still relies on undersea cables and telegrams, measured in hours and days rather than minutes. Inventors take note. Without the right success, momentum collapses. European pioneers like Alberto Santos Dumont and Octave Chanute struggle to attract serious funding. Ballooning survives, but heavier-than-air flight is increasingly viewed as a technological dead end. By the end of the decade, laboratories close. Workshops empty. The dream of flight quietly slips into dormancy. What no one realizes, yet, is that this is not a temporary pause. Without airplanes, strategic thinking begins to shift. Wars are planned without air reconnaissance. Borders feel thicker. Empires feel safer. Distance regains its power as a natural defense. The world doesn't speed up, it hardens. And as nations grow more confident behind oceans, railways, and fleets, a dangerous illusion takes hold. If no one can attack from the sky, then no one ever will. But that assumption is about to reshape global power in ways far more destabilizing than flight ever did. And the next chapter of history will be written not above the clouds, but in the shadow of empires that no longer fear the horizon. What if global power was never measured by who controlled the air, but by who controlled the rails, the ports, and the choke points of the sea? In a world with no airplanes, influence doesn't reach across continents in hours. It crawls, ships, and steams its way forward, and that single limitation rewrites geopolitics. In our timeline, aviation quickly became a shortcut to dominance, reconnaissance from above, fast troop movement, bombing campaigns, and rapid global projection. But here, none of that exists. Every empire remains chained to geography. And geography rewards the old powers, those with navies, colonies, and rail networks already in place. Britain, for instance, doesn't fear air raids over London because the concept never materializes. The Royal Navy remains the ultimate shield, and the empire's lifeline is still the sea. France doubles down on border fortifications and rail mobilization. Germany, hungry for security and resources, invests obsessively in logistics, heavier artillery, faster trains, deeper supply systems. War planning becomes a chess game of steel and schedules, because without air reconnaissance, information is slower, and mistakes cost more. Then comes the real pivot: alliances harden earlier. Without planes to scout enemy positions, armies rely on spies, balloons, and ground patrols. Miscalculations multiply. Diplomacy grows more paranoid. And because global travel is still measured in weeks, leaders meet less often, misunderstand more, and trust less. Treaties become rigid scripts instead of flexible negotiations. Meanwhile, colonial control tightens. In our world, airplanes later became tools of oversight, fast surveillance, rapid response, and symbolic dominance. Here, empires don't modernize that way. They do it the old way: stronger garrisons, stricter shipping lanes, more rail lines carved into colonies. That makes independence movements harder to coordinate across distance. Revolts that might have spread quickly in our timeline remain isolated, contained before they can become global causes. Unexpected winners rise, too. Rail empires gain prestige, states that can move goods and armies across vast land become more formidable than those who dreamed of air routes. Regions controlling canals and straits, Suez, Gibraltar, the Dardanelles, turn into political pressure points more valuable than gold. Even neutral states with strategic ports suddenly matter far more, because every global connection must pass through somebody's coastline. And then there's the wild card, Zeppelins. In this world, rigid airships never get replaced by airplanes, because there are no airplanes. They remain expensive, delicate, and limited, but politically irresistible. Germany funds them not as weapons, but as symbols, floating proof that the sky is still possible, even if heavier-than-air flight failed. Britain responds with its own airship program to protect trade prestige. A race for the sky begins, slow, fragile, and dangerously political. By the 1910s, the world feels tense in a new way, not faster, but tighter. Borders are thicker. Empires are more defensive. And every diplomatic mistake takes longer to fix. Then the twist hits. Instead of nations competing for air superiority, they compete for something else, total control of global shipping. A new alliance quietly forms around navies, ports, and fuel routes, not ideology. And once oceans become the only highway between continents, one question decides who rules the century. Who controls the world's trade, controls the world. And in the next chapter, we'll see what happens when the entire global economy is forced to live and fight on the surface alone. What if the global economy was never built for speed, but for endurance? In a world without airplanes, wealth doesn't move through the sky. It crawls along rails, sails across oceans, and bottlenecks wherever geography allows. And that single constraint reshapes capitalism itself. In our timeline, aviation compressed distance. Fresh goods crossed continents overnight. Executives flew between capitals. Supply chains stretched thin but fast. Here, none of that happens. Trade remains stubbornly physical, anchored to ports, rail hubs, canals, and coastlines. Economic power flows not to innovators of speed, but to masters of logistics. Maritime nations thrive first. Britain, already dominant at sea, reinforces its grip on global shipping lanes. The Royal Mail Steam Packet Company, Cunard, and similar firms become economic arteries of the empire, not just transport services. Control of ports like Liverpool, Singapore, and Cape Town determines access to markets. Insurance, warehousing, and shipbuilding explode into massive industries, while air freight never exists to challenge them. On land, rail empires rise. Germany and the United States invest heavily in continental rail networks, turning cities like Berlin, Chicago, and Hamburg into industrial supernodes. Rail monopolies gain unprecedented influence, dictating prices, labor conditions, and even foreign policy priorities. Where tracks end, opportunity ends too. Inland regions disconnected from major lines fall behind, locked into regional economies with limited growth. Consumer culture evolves differently. There is no overnight delivery, no fresh tropical fruit in winter, no rapid fashion cycles. Goods are durable, local, seasonal. Luxury still exists, but it moves slowly. Coffee, spices, rubber, oil, commodities tied to colonies become more valuable, not less, because replacing them takes time. This strengthens colonial economies and delays decolonization, as empires argue that stability, not speed, is essential to prosperity. Some industries never emerge at all. There are no global airline manufacturers, no airport cities, no tourism economies built on weekend flights. International conferences are rare. Business decisions take weeks. Markets react slower, but crashes, when they come, hit harder because supply cannot quickly adapt. Unexpected winners emerge. Canal authorities, especially around the Suez and Panama Canals, become economic kingmakers. A single blockage can stall continents. Port cities eclipse capitals. Even telegraph and undersea cable companies gain power, because information must race faster than goods to compensate for physical delay. And yet, something counterintuitive happens. Without air transport, globalization slows, but inequality narrows in some regions. Local manufacturing survives longer. Skilled labor retains value. Communities depend less on distant markets and more on regional resilience. The world becomes economically fragmented, but strangely more stable. At least for now. Because as technology strains to overcome these limits, pressure builds. Engineers, inventors, and governments begin searching for new ways to defeat distance, not by flying over it, but by reshaping life beneath it. And in the next chapter, we'll see how technology responds when the sky remains forever out of reach. What if technology didn't race toward the sky, but tunneled, stretched, and strained along the surface of the Earth instead? In a world where airplanes never exist, innovation doesn't stop. It reroutes. And the paths it takes reshape civilization in quieter, heavier ways. Without aviation, science pivots towards solving one relentless problem: distance. Governments and industries pour resources into technologies that move people, goods, and information faster across land and sea. Rail engineering advances decades ahead of schedule. Trains grow longer, heavier, and faster, powered by early electrification rather than steam. Entire cities reorganize around rail terminals, which become the beating hearts of commerce and migration. In our world, the jet age shrank continents. Here, railways attempt the same feat, one steel track at a time. At sea, shipbuilding enters a golden age. Engineers design massive, fuel-efficient vessels meant to dominate oceans for weeks without resupply. Navigation technology improves rapidly. Early sonar, more precise gyroscopes, and advanced weather prediction systems emerge not for exploration, but survival. Without air reconnaissance, navies rely on detection, patience, and positioning. Warfare becomes slower, but deadlier when mistakes are made. Communication, however, advances fastest of all. Because goods cannot move quickly, information must. Telegraph networks expand aggressively. Undersea cables become strategic assets guarded like fortresses. By the early 20th century, experimental relay systems and early signal amplification appear, primitive ancestors of digital networking, driven by the need to coordinate empires spread across oceans. In our timeline, satellites would later dominate this role. Here, the planet is wrapped instead in wires. Some technologies stall completely. Aerodynamics remains an academic curiosity. Lightweight composite materials arrive later, without aircraft to demand them. Rocketry develops more slowly, seen as impractical without foundational flight knowledge. Space remains an abstract dream, not a looming destination. Humanity's gaze stays horizontal, not vertical. Yet unexpected substitutes emerge. Engineers experiment with high-speed ground transit, including enclosed rail corridors designed to reduce drag, early conceptual cousins of magnetic or vacuum-assisted trains. Urban planners build dense, walkable cities connected by electric trams and regional rail, because sprawl without cars and planes is inefficient. Medicine adapts too. Without rapid air evacuation, trauma care becomes more localized, driving innovation in mobile hospitals and advanced surgical techniques near population centers. All of this is shaped by pressure. Empires demand efficiency. Markets demand reliability. Isolation forces self-sufficiency. Technology becomes less about exploration, and more about control, optimization, and resilience. Then comes the unsettling realization. By the mid-20th century, This world transmits information across oceans faster than ours ever did, yet still moves people at roughly the speed of their grandparents. Humanity learns to speak instantly across continents, while remaining physically trapped within them. And as technology begins to separate the speed of thought from the speed of the body, a deeper question emerges, one that will soon redefine culture itself. What happens to human identity when the world feels connected, but never truly reachable? What if culture itself was shaped not by speed and exposure, but by distance and patience? In a world without airplanes, ideas don't circulate instantly. They settle, deepen, and grow roots. And over decades, this slowness reshapes how people see themselves, their neighbors, and the very idea of the world. Without mass air travel, cultures remain regionally dense. Language evolves more distinctly, even within the same nation. Accents harden into identities. Dialects don't fade under global media pressure, they flourish. A person from southern Italy doesn't just sound different from someone in the north, they carry different stories, metaphors, and assumptions shaped by limited movement and long local memory. Cultural borders are not erased by mobility, they are reinforced by it. Art reflects this inward gravity. Instead of global movements sweeping continents in years, artistic styles grow slowly and locally. Painting and architecture emphasize permanence over novelty, stone, brick, wood, materials meant to last generations. Cities don't chase skylines meant to impress visitors from afar, they build for residents who will likely never leave. Music follows the same pattern. Folk traditions remain dominant, evolving into complex regional forms rather than being flattened into global pop. There are no worldwide chart toppers, only songs that belong to places. Literature, too, takes a different turn. Travel novels are rare and revered, written by the few who spend months crossing oceans. Most stories are intimate, rooted in community and continuity rather than movement. Heroes are not globetrotters or explorers of distant lands, they are stewards, builders, negotiators. The myth of the restless individual chasing opportunity across borders never fully takes hold. Identity is inherited as much as chosen. Popular culture lacks shared global moments. There is no instant worldwide audience reacting to the same film, the same performance, the same tragedy. News arrives late and filtered. Events feel local, even when they are massive. This makes cultures more resilient, but also more insular. Stereotypes persist longer. Misunderstandings harden. Without easy travel, imagination fills the gaps where experience would have gone. Daily rituals reflect this grounded worldview. Festivals celebrate seasons, harvests, and historical memory rather than global milestones. Fashion changes slowly, favoring durability over trend. Even dreams are shaped differently. Children don't imagine seeing the whole world, they imagine mastering their place in it. And yet, something quietly powerful emerges. Because when people cannot leave easily, they invest deeply. Communities are tighter. Traditions carry weight. Belonging matters. Culture becomes less performative and more lived in, thicker, slower, harder to uproot. But this raises an unsettling question. When cultures grow strong by staying apart, what happens when they are finally forced to confront one another? Because in a world that never learned to fly, difference doesn't disappear. It waits. And in the next chapter, we'll see how belief, faith, and meaning evolve when humanity's sense of distance applies not just to geography, but to the unknown itself. What if humanity never learned to look down on the world from above, and never felt small, unified, or godlike in the way flight eventually made us feel? In a grounded world, belief does not shrink under technology. It expands into the spaces that progress cannot reach. Without airplanes, the world remains vast and uneven. Distance is not conquered, it is respected. Journeys still take weeks, sometimes months, and most people die within a few hundred miles of where they were born. This changes how humanity understands the unknown. In our timeline, flight, and later space travel, quietly reframed religion by showing Earth as a single, fragile sphere. Here, that revelation never arrives. The world is not one image. It is many mysteries. Religions adapt accordingly. Faith becomes more localized, experiential, and rooted in place. Regional spiritual traditions thrive instead of dissolving into globalized belief systems. Pilgrimages are rare and profound undertakings, not logistical challenges solved by tickets and timetables. Sacred geography matters more than sacred universality. Mountains, rivers, deserts, and coastlines become divine boundaries, places where the human world feels thin and the unseen feels close. New philosophies emerge to explain a slower, heavier existence. One influential movement spreads through Europe and parts of Asia in the early 20th century, a belief sometimes called grounded humanism. It teaches that meaning is found not in transcendence or escape, but in continuity, family, craft, memory, and responsibility to place. Progress, its thinkers argue, is not measured by how far humanity travels, but by how deeply it understands where it stands. At the same time, older religious institutions regain influence. Without global media or rapid cultural exchange, reform spreads slowly. Schisms harden. Interpretations diverge. A faith in one region may look almost unrecognizable in another. Moral codes emphasize duty over ambition, restraint over exploration. Education reinforces these values, teaching history as lineage rather than destiny, and ethics as stewardship rather than conquest. Politics absorbs this worldview. Leaders speak less about global futures and more about inherited obligations. Nations justify borders as moral facts, not temporary lines. Expansion is framed as dangerous, not because it is immoral, but because it disrupts spiritual balance. The sky, once imagined as humanity's next domain, becomes symbolically distant again, the realm of gods, fate, or unknowable forces beyond human reach. Daily rituals reflect this philosophy. Prayers ask for stability, not transformation. Festivals celebrate endurance rather than discovery. Even language changes, metaphors of ascent, elevation, and rising above fade, replaced by imagery of roots, foundations, and cycles. And yet, a paradox takes hold. In a world without flight, faith grows stronger, but also narrower. Meaning deepens locally while understanding between cultures weakens. Belief provides purpose, but it also draws harder boundaries around who belongs, and who does not. So the question lingers. Did humanity lose something sacred when it learned to fly, or did it gain the humility that only limits can teach? And as belief systems grow more powerful in a world that moves slowly and thinks deeply, one thing becomes clear. Soon, faith will no longer remain private. It is about to collide with power, ambition, and the future itself. What does an ordinary day look like when the world never learned to fly? In this timeline, normal moves at a slower pace, and that pace quietly shapes everything from ambition to family life. Most people live close to where they were born, not because of tradition alone, but because distance still carries weight. Travel is deliberate, expensive, and time-consuming. A move to another country is a life-altering decision, not a career step. As a result, communities are denser and more familiar. Neighbors know one another across generations. Reputation matters. Memory lasts longer than novelty. Work reflects this grounded reality. Professions tied to place dominate everyday life: rail engineers, port clerks, shipbuilders, mechanics, teachers, nurses, craftsmen, agricultural specialists. Careers grow slowly, often through apprenticeships rather than sudden leaps. Advancement depends less on being seen globally and more on trust earned locally. Social mobility exists, but it is shaped by geography. If opportunity does not pass through your town by rail or ship, it may never reach you at all. Education follows the same logic. Universities draw mostly regional students. Knowledge spreads through books, lectures, and correspondence, not conferences across continents. Children are taught practical skills alongside history and ethics rooted in their community. The idea of seeing the world as a rite of passage never becomes common. Instead, maturity is marked by responsibility, supporting family, mastering a trade, contributing to local life. Family structures grow tighter. Extended families often live nearby, sometimes under the same roof. Childcare, elder care, and daily labor are shared. Gender roles shift unevenly. In some regions, tradition holds firm. In others, economic necessity opens new paths. Women become vital figures in education, logistics, medicine, and local administration, not through sudden liberation movements, but through steady integration into community survival. Leisure is slower and more collective. Evenings are spent in public halls, local theaters, or shared meals rather than consuming mass global entertainment. Sports remain regional. Music and storytelling are performed live. Holidays celebrate harvests, anniversaries, and historical memory rather than global events. Without constant outside influence, culture feels thicker, less distracted, but also less flexible. Housing mirrors this permanence. Homes are built to last, not to flip. Neighborhoods evolve gradually. Cities expand outward along rail lines instead of upward or outward through air-connected suburbs. Time feels layered, past and present existing side by side. And here is the quiet contrast that defines it all. In our world, an ordinary person can wake up in one country and fall asleep in another. In this world, most people will never see a place their grandparents couldn't have reached. So the question lingers, if speed never redefined possibility, did people lose freedom? Or did they gain a deeper sense of belonging? As this grounded world steps fully into the modern era, these ordinary lives will soon face extraordinary pressure, from forces that no longer move slowly at all. Step into the present day of this grounded timeline, and the world feels both familiar and strangely restrained. Cities still glow at night, trade still binds continents, and technology hums beneath everyday life, but the rhythm is different. Slower. Heavier. The planet has not shrunk. It has settled. Power gathers where land and sea meet. Port cities dominate the global map, not as gateways for tourists, but as arteries of survival. Harbors are vast, layered with cranes, warehouses, rail spurs, and customs halls that never sleep. Trains roll in endless lines from inland capitals to the coast, carrying food, fuel, people, and influence. Where tracks converge, wealth follows. Where they don't, regions fade quietly into the background. Political authority reflects this geography. Governments rule through infrastructure rather than reach. Naval fleets remain the ultimate symbols of power, guarding shipping lanes the way airspace is guarded in our world. Alliances are built around fuel routes, canals, and ports instead of airbases. Borders feel thicker, not because they are more violent, but because crossing them still demands time and intention. Migration happens, but slowly, deliberately, and often permanently. Technology is everywhere, yet never overhead. Streets buzz with electric trams and freight convoys. Communication is instant, screens flicker with messages from across oceans, but physical presence remains rare. International summits are infrequent and monumental, planned years in advance. When leaders meet, it is an event, not a routine. Media coverage stretches for days as ships arrive, delegations disembark, and the world pauses to watch decisions made face to face. Culturally, the planet feels plural rather than unified. There is no single global style, no shared pop moment sweeping continents overnight. Instead, each region projects its own identity outward through film, literature, and art, circulating slowly, translated carefully, absorbed unevenly. Differences are visible everywhere, in architecture, fashion, public rituals, even body language. The world is connected, but not blended. Some regions dominate this balance. Coastal powers with dense rail networks shape trade and politics. Others remain isolated, not frozen in time, but self-contained, cautious, inward-looking. Inequality exists not just between rich and poor, but between connected and distant. Influence spreads by proximity, not altitude. And yet, life works. Cities function. Markets adapt. People build futures without ever expecting to see the whole planet. Walking through this modern world, one senses an unspoken truth: humanity learned to master communication without mastering movement. Ideas travel freely. Bodies do not. The result is a civilization that knows about one another more than it knows one another. Which raises a quiet, unsettling question. If the world feels larger, deeper, and more divided, but also more stable, what did we truly gain by learning to fly? Because in the next chapter, we will leave the global map behind and return to something smaller. To a single human life living inside this world, and the cost that life never learned to name. In the year 2026, in a world that never learned to fly, an ordinary morning begins quietly. Elena wakes just before sunrise in a mid-sized inland city connected to the coast by a single, vital rail line. The sound that pulls her from sleep isn't traffic overhead or planes crossing the sky, but the distant vibration of an early freight train, steady and familiar. She's heard it all her life. It means goods are moving, schedules are holding, the world beyond her neighborhood is still turning. Her commute is predictable. She walks 3 blocks to the tram stop, coffee warming her hands, joining the same faces she's known for years. Some are headed to the rail depot, others to schools, clinics, municipal offices. Careers here are stable, often lifelong. People don't chase opportunity across continents, they grow into it where they stand. Advancement comes through reliability, not reinvention. Elena works as a logistics coordinator for a regional distribution hub, an unglamorous but essential role in a grounded economy. Her day revolves around timetables, cargo manifests, weather reports, and rail capacity. Delays matter. Distance matters. Every decision ripples outward, sometimes for weeks. She communicates constantly, messages arrive instantly from ports hundreds of miles away, but she has never met most of the people she works with. That's normal. Presence is rare. Coordination is everything. Lunch is local food, seasonal and familiar. Restaurants change menus slowly. Nothing arrives overnight from across the world. Conversation drifts toward community news, a school expansion, a repaired bridge, a cousin preparing for a long sea journey that will take months. Such trips are still spoken of with a mix of pride and quiet worry. After work, Elena stops by her parents' apartment. They live nearby, as most families do. Grandparents help with childcare. Stories are passed down easily when generations share streets instead of video calls. In the evening, she attends a small lecture at the local hall, an author visiting from another region after a 2-week journey by rail and ship. The room is full. Events like this are rare and valued. At home, Elena scrolls through messages from friends in other countries. She knows their lives through words and images, not shared experiences. The world feels vast, detailed, and oddly distant. She plans carefully, vacations are long commitments, career changes slower calculations. Success is defined not by how far you go, but by how well you live where you are. Before bed, she opens a worn atlas inherited from her grandfather. Some pages are marked with notes from trips he never took, places imagined more than seen. Elena closes the book gently. She doesn't feel trapped. But she has never felt the world grow small enough to hold in her hands, and she wonders, quietly, what that might have changed. By 2026, technology in this grounded world tells a clear story, not of failure, but of redirection. When the airplane never arrived, innovation learned to work around gravity instead of conquering it. Some tools advanced far beyond our own. Others never appeared at all. Transportation reveals the sharpest contrast. With no aviation industry to pull materials science upward, lightweight composites and extreme miniaturization arrive late. Instead, rail technology becomes supreme. Ultra-durable tracks, automated switching systems, and electrically powered freight corridors stretch across continents. Passenger trains are slower than jets, but astonishingly reliable. Cities synchronize their lives to rail timetables the way our world syncs to flight boards. Miss a connection, and the consequences ripple for days. At sea, shipping evolves into a precision science. Ships grow smarter rather than faster, guided by advanced navigation systems, predictive weather modeling, and early autonomous assistance. Ports resemble living machines, with layered logistics platforms that coordinate cargo down to the hour. Without air freight, inventory planning becomes an art, and shortages shape consumer behavior. People buy what's available, not what's trending. Communication, however, outpaces our world in unexpected ways. Because bodies move slowly, information must move instantly. Fiber-like cable networks blanket oceans and continents earlier. Secure relay stations, redundancy systems, and encrypted channels become national priorities. In practice, people can speak across the planet in seconds, yet may never meet face to face. Presence becomes rare. Voice and text become the primary currency of connection. Medicine adapts locally. Without air evacuation, hospitals specialize regionally. Mobile surgical units, advanced diagnostics, and preventative care flourish near population centers. Trauma medicine emphasizes survival where you are, not rapid transfer elsewhere. Outcomes improve unevenly, excellent in connected regions, fragile in isolated ones, deepening geographic inequality. Warfare follows the same pattern. Without air power, militaries invest in cyber coordination, electronic disruption, naval dominance, and rail-secured supply chains. Surveillance relies on ground sensors, satellites launched later and more cautiously, and human intelligence. Battles are fewer, but longer, more decisive, and harder to reverse once begun. Some technologies never materialize. There are no commercial drones, no cheap global tourism platforms, no airport cities, no culture of constant motion. Space exploration lags without aviation stepping stones, rockets exist, but ambition remains cautious. The sky is not humanity's playground, it is a boundary. And yet, other tools surpass our reality. Urban design becomes more humane. Energy systems are decentralized and resilient. Automation focuses on maintenance and continuity, not speed. Technology here is less glamorous, but deeply integrated into daily survival. The result is a world of uneven brilliance. Hyper-advanced communication paired with limited movement. Strong local systems coexisting with fragile global ones. Progress measured not by velocity, but by control. Which leaves one final, unsettling question. If humanity learned to master information without mastering movement, did it truly advance, Or did it simply learn to live within its limits? Because in the final chapter, we'll confront what this choice ultimately meant, not for systems or nations, but for the human story itself. The greatest surprise of a world without airplanes is not what humanity failed to reach, but what it learned to accept. When the Wright brothers' fragile machine never left the sands of Kitty Hawk, the sky remained a boundary instead of a highway. And in that absence, civilization took a slower, heavier path. Nations grew around rails and ports. Cultures deepened instead of blending. Technology favored stability over speed. People lived closer to home, closer to history, closer to one another. The world did not shrink. It matured. Yet the irony is unavoidable. This grounded civilization avoided some of our timeline's greatest horrors: total air war, instant mass destruction from above, the constant acceleration of crisis. But it also surrendered something quietly powerful: the shared sense of being one species on a small planet. Without the view from the sky, without the ease of crossing borders, humanity never fully learned to see itself as a single whole. Progress here became cautious, regional, and deliberate. Innovations were weighed by consequence rather than excitement. Choices carried memory. Distance carried meaning. Life gained texture, but lost immediacy. Connection existed, but rarely presence. Knowledge traveled freely. Bodies did not. So the question is not whether this world is better or worse. It is whether humanity traded reach for depth, and whether that trade was ever truly understood. History often celebrates invention as inevitability. But this story reminds us that every breakthrough closes doors as surely as it opens them. A single missed flight reshaped power, belief, culture, and the most ordinary moments of daily life. Not because humanity failed, but because it chose a different rhythm. And that leaves us with one final question. If you could return to that windy beach in 1903 and decide the outcome yourself, would you let the machine rise into the air? Or would you leave the world grounded, and live with everything that followed? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how you weigh progress against consequence. And if this story made you rethink history's turning points, join us next time as we explore another fragile moment where one choice changed everything. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more journeys into alternate histories that almost, just barely, didn't happen.